Welcome to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. I'm extremely honored to be hosting this conversation today. Before we get going, make sure to like the video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel if you are not. About half the people who watch these shows, I keep saying this, haven't subscribed yet to the channel, so make sure to do that. Um, and yeah, hopefully, people will share it after, share it now to get people into the live conversation, but also share it with your friends afterwards, share it with your comrades. If you're organizing on, college campuses and are looking for ways to do, popular education, then I think this will be a great discussion. Um, so we're gonna welcome Ameed Faleh to the podcast to obviously discuss the martyr Refaat al-Rir, um, and obviously we didn't we planned this prior to also this. I don't know if it was Friday or Saturday, the assassination of, I think, Friday, his daughter and um, his grandson, who he had not met, because he was born after Rifat was martyred, and so um, obviously that's also heavy, on our hearts today, and we wanted to do this to um, uplift and continue to honor the legacy of Rafat. And there was a just a brilliant piece, right? And so I hope people read it. It's linked in the show notes. It's by our friends at Ebb Magazine. I would guess that Louis Alday probably was involved as an editor, so, um, Ameed is a Palestinian student at al-Quds University. I'm going to welcome him to the stage and also just give him space to say a little bit more about himself before we get into this conversation. So, Ameed, welcome to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. It's great to be in conversation with you.
Thanks for having me, Jared. So my name is Ameed Faleh. I am a Palestinian student at al-Quds College, which is at al-Quds University. I study basically political science and economy. It's a fancy major called social thought, economy, and policy, but it's basically political science plus economics. I had the wonderful opportunity and to write with App Magazine 2 times, and Louis Alday was directly involved in the editorial process of that. So I want to thank him for this wonderful opportunity to just voice my opinion and sort of say what I want to say, I guess. So I mainly, in my writing, I write in Arabic and I write in English. In my writing, I try to focus also on the bigger picture. I don't get caught up in the details. I try to focus on the bigger picture and how it relates to our context. And I wrote 2 pieces. One was on the 27th of October. It was talking about the repercussions or the implications of October 7th on the West Bank. And the second piece is the productive language and sort of how we should honor and mourn Rifat al-Rir, our martyr. So yeah, that's about it for me.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm gonna put the first piece in the chat too, if people also want to check that one out. That's not in the show notes, but this is the piece on the permanent death of the Oslo Accords, which is also in above. Yeah, there it is. There we go. In this issue of a magazine, above my shoulder. For folks who haven't purchased that yet, I still, it's really a great piece of collection of writing, and I think that it's very difficult to write something in a moment like we're in and write something that's going to remain prescient and relevant and you know uh connected to the struggle as it continues to move forward. But I still feel like I think all of the pieces in that magazine still hold up very well in terms of what people laid out. And so, yeah, definitely recommend it to folks if they haven't bought it yet. Um, All right. So let's get into this piece we're here to discuss today. So let's just start with what kind of brought you to writing this piece, because I think that's always a good place to start. So what made you want to write a piece about Rifat, and what drew you to writing about him um, through a lineage of. You don't use Walter Rodney, but I was reminded in this piece of Walter Rodney, the term guerrilla intellectuals, right? And it kind of reminds me of the types of thinkers that you're thinking of Rafat alongside. Um, so yeah, what drew you to writing him, and what drew you to writing about him along with this kind of tradition that you recognize as kind of a framework for his practice?
Yeah. Before I start sort of answering the question, I just want to remind everyone of the assassination of his sister, Rifat's sister, his daughter, and his grand child, 2 days ago by an Israeli airstrike. So when we talk about the first question, we have to also put that into context. That even after his martyrdom, his family is still targeted for just being related to Rifat. Um, so in that sense, when I wrote my piece, and when Rifat was actually got martyred, I knew Rifat vaguely through Twitter over the years. So I've been on Twitter for like since 2015, 2016. So I always came across his tweets, and he was always a funny person, and he was always very much straight to the point, and he doesn't basically bullshit. He is very much clear, principled, and has a stance towards everything. He's definitely not like anyone who condemned October 7th. Definitely. So it's important to put that into perspective. When I wrote my piece, I envisioned Rifat in the lineage of a guerrilla intellectual, as you talked about. And I didn't use Walter Rodney for a reason. It's because I'm not very much well read on Walter Rodney. I need to get on that. So that's definitely on my to-do list. But from what I know of Walter Rodney, um, he led Guyana. He led its national movement. He was very much a Pan-African leader, and he was very much well respected outside of also Guyana. He contributed a lot to sort of how we look at imperialism, how we look at sort of the fight against it. So in that sense, looking at Rifat within the lineage of Ghassan Kanafani, Basil al-Araj, Fathi al-Shiqaqi, Had al-Alawi, those thinkers that actually through their writings, you could see that the fact that they are not egotistical, they are not smug, they speak clearly and loudly, and they have an actual stance. And for me, when I saw Rifat sort of quoting Malcolm X and sort of basically metaphorically screaming against every Zionist on Twitter, and when I saw his students on Twitter sort of saying how much of an inspiration he was, the first thought that I thought of is that this guy is a fighter. He's not merely an intellectual. To be able to sort of build a space for yourself, and this sort of space is not funded by anyone. It's solely through your blood and sweat in a besieged enclave that reverberates throughout sort of the entirety of the Gaza Strip, because it's university work is not confined to the very, very physical space of the university. The physical space of the university is very much suffocating. So whatever idea you transfer across to your students and to your disciples, it seeps through the streets. So Rifat may have got martyred, but I think there are many other Rifats. And if my cat in the background is meowing, it's because she's meowing as per usual. So in that sense, you look at Ghassan Kanafani and you look at how he used to teach children at Damascus when he was in Damascus, and in Lebanon, and his wife later, Annie Kanafani, and how she handles teaching and pedagogy. You see some sort of through lines through that education is a front that you fight in, and just because you don't bear arms doesn't mean you're not a fighter. You support the fighters via building an actual epistemology that is rooted in resistance and resilience, and sort of encouraging a lot of Gazans that may have been disillusioned with the state of affairs in Gaza, because it is under a brutal blockade, that to actually stay in and to hold the ground, it's one of the most noble acts, and it's definitely as important as the military front, definitely. So those are my reasons sort of for why I specifically wrote about Rifat and what Rifat reminded me of. And sort of when I thought about Ghassan, it's snowballed into thinking about Hanna Mikhail, Fathi Shiqaqi, Hadi Alawi, and Basil Larish, and Amilcar Cabral, of course.
Yeah, and we'll get to all of those folks as we kind of weave through the piece. I love that discussion about the importance of writers, of supporting the fighters by developing epistemology that supports resistance and resilience. Absolutely. Um, so let's walk through the piece a little bit. So you start in 1968, a year that incidentally a lot of people are thinking about right now because of the student protests going on in the United States now, which there was also a lot of student protesting, all kinds of upsurges around the world, really, in 1968. But you start with the figure, and please correct my pronunciation because I'm going to mispronounce some names here. I know. Hannah Mical.
Hanna Mikhail.
Okay.
So I start with him, yes.
So,
And
you write he's quote, sorry, I just want to read the quote here. So, a quote, a young Palestinian assistant professor of political science at Washington University in Seattle decided to travel to Jordan to join the Palestinian resistance, end quote. You write about him alongside Lenin, Cabral, specifically around Cabral's theory of class suicide, as well as, oh, you've already said Bassel al-Araj. So say a little bit about his story and kind of why you started there. And yeah, we'll start there.
I started there specifically because of 1967 and the sort of implications of 1967 on the entirety of the Arab world, and how the Arab viewed themselves after we lost the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights. There was a sense of defeat, that we're utterly defeated, that represented by Jamal Abdel Nasser has been crushed, and that there's no going back. There's no use to fighting. There's no use of doing what we're doing. So I started 1969 precisely because of that, precisely because the mentality of defeat, he challenged the mentality of defeat, and he went against it. And when we look at the history of his family and what they did, and his own personal history and his own personal interests, the picture, I think, becomes clearer. So Hannah Mikhail was born in October 24th, 1935, to a Christian family. He went in Ramallah. He went to the Friends Quaker School in Ramallah. So there were a lot of Christian missionaries coming in from the U.S., from Germany, from England, and they were fine. They created sort of hospitals. They created educational institutions, stuff like that. Of course, for obvious purposes of colonialism. So it was not out of their own sort of kindness. So he went there and he excelled so much at the school that he got, I think, when he was like 17, he went. He had 7 distinctions at the school, and he went to Harvard School in Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken.
It's right near Philadelphia. Yeah.
Yeah. So he went there and he studied chemistry. And afterwards, he continued his studies at Harvard. and he studied political science. So you see a radical sort of shift from chemistry to political science. And it can be explained by the period he was in. So the rise of Arab nationalism, the sort of the hope in the 50s and the early 60s that liberation is finally coming. Like Palestine was stolen from us, but we can liberate it through the Pan Arab Project. So many Arabs started taking interest in politics, and we'll see this theme with Fath al-Shiqaqi also. So he studied political science, and he did his thesis on a Muslim thinker. He's a theologian. He's a jurist. He's the father of political science in the Islamic world. His name is Mawardi, and I think his work, his own thesis, has been translated into English. Not translated. It was translated into Arabic, and it published under a book. But it also has a contemporary English edition. It's called Politics and Revelation, Al-Mawardi and After, by Hanna Michael. So you could read it. It's there. You can buy it. And it talks about sort of the thought of the thought of Al-Mawardi and how he viewed politics. And for Hanna Michael, it was published for this book. It was published posthumously. So he always thought that it was missing something, and he always refused to sort of publish it. And when he was at I think Princeton, so he taught Arabic at Princeton. His friend approached him and said, "Look, we can print it at Princeton and sort of see where the book goes." And he was like, "No, it's still not ready," and it wasn't ready at the time he was alive. So he taught at Princeton, as I said. I think he was an assistant professor of Arabic at Princeton, and then finally he taught at Washington University, which is thematic to what's happening, because Washington University is having encampments and having divestment efforts and having student protesters there. So I think if they raised the image of Hanna Michael, that would have been so good. Because he is very much a distinguished student and a distinguished intellectual that deserves the recognition. And unfortunately, he doesn't have that recognition. So that's why I brought him up in the article. So he was an assistant professor at political science in Washington University. And at that precise moment in 1969, the Battle of al-Karami happened. Israeli forces stormed the border town of al-Karami in Jordan. The PLO forces were there, especially Fatah and the PFLP. They fought off the attack with some sort of stray Jordanian units that went against the command. And this is a constant theme with Jordan in battles, that its own fighters go against the command. You see it in 1948, you see it in 1967, you see it in Karama. And they fought and they won. And when you compare the defeat of 1967 to the victory at al-Karami, it rejuvenated that hope of liberation, that Israel is not a god. We can defeat Israel. And it's not the army that it touts itself as. It can be defeated, just like any other colonial power. So this brought up a lot of Arab support for the PLO and Fatah especially. And the Arabs flocked, basically. All Arabs from all nationalities, they flocked to Fatah. One of them is Hanna Michael, and he took his post from Washington, and he went to Jordan, and he went to the training camps, and he trained on how to use arms and stuff like that, despite the insistence of his parents that, look, you live a good life. You are very much a distinguished professor. You have a good life. Why are you doing this to yourself? And his answer was like, I'm not working for profit. I'm not. It's the least of my concern. What I want to do is to better my people and to push them forward. And in that sense, he went to Jordan on that basis. And afterwards, he sort of became involved with the PLO at large, and Fatah in particular, with sort of preparing organizational materials. So setting the coalescing sort of the thought, the leftist thought in Fatah. And Fatah is notoriously, it's very much ideologically porous. It is both a weak point and a strong point for Fatah. A weak point in the sense that if you have no ideological sort of conception of what you're doing, you're going to get, everything is going to get muddied. And this explains Oslo also. A strong point is that it can mobilize anyone. But that's besides the point. So he prepared organizational materials for Fatah, and he drew upon the Algerian, Chinese, and Vietnamese examples. And he always stressed that the FLN in Algeria and how it sort of rallied itself with the Algerian masses, it needs to happen in Palestine with the Palestinian case. There needs to be a Palestinian FLN. And when he was saying we need a Palestinian FLN, he aimed to say basically that this factionalism is bad. That we have the Fatah, the PFLP, the DFLP, and some other Fidaiyan organizations. That's bad. We need to coalesce into a certain organization, set a certain organizational structure and a certain ideology. He worked as a representative of the PLO for the press, for sort of foreign visits. So he created relations between Fatah and the Socialist Bloc, China and the Soviet Union. And that wasn't a problem for Fatah. So despite the Sino-Soviet split, he sort of created those relations, and he acted as a media representative for the PLO. So, and this is unfortunately missing from the archives. I wish it was not missing. I tried searching for it, and there's no video. He debated Alan Dershowitz one time in the 1970s on a program called The Advocates. He debated him, and he was arguing for a one democratic Palestinian state, Hanna. And Alan Dershowitz was Alan Dershowitz. I mean, what more can be said about him? He defended Israel against sort of he denied the Nakba. He defended Israel against the very obvious crimes it does. And at the end of the discussion, Alan Dershowitz slammed the table with his hand live on camera in front of everyone. This is from friends of Hanna. This is from his wife, and this is from his mother. So a lot of testimony going on with this. He slammed the table with his hand, and Hanna was like, "Look, you cannot prove your argument with noise. You have to put a lot of effort, and you have unfortunately failed this debate." And it ties a bit to my article that there is no use debating with Zionists. There's no use debating with bad faith actors. The most they can do when they're stuck in an argument is throw a tantrum like children, which was what Alan Dershowitz did live on camera. So in that sense, this is what Hanna Mical represents, and the through lines with, and I want to talk about, before I connect it to Refaat, I want to talk about his mysterious disappearance. So he disappeared in 1976 off the coast of North Lebanon. He was trying to mediate between the different sort of factions between Fatah. So he went on a boat to Tripoli in Lebanon, and he went missing. No one knows where he is. Some say he was murdered. I have no idea what side actually murdered him. There's no definitive proof, so I'm not going to put it out on air. And some say that he was kidnapped. To this day, I have no idea. It's the same thing if you look at Musa Sadr in Lebanon. The same thing happened. He went to Libya, he went missing. Both of them probably got assassinated. That's the reality of it. So when connecting it to Rifat, wanted to stress the fact that both of them rejected the elitism of their sort of fields. Um, in the case of Hanna Mikhail, he actually trained using weapons. So he trained on using weapons. He developed organizational material, and he always stressed praxis, praxis, praxis. And he said you cannot be a member of a revolutionary organization if you do not know how to use weapons, if you do not know how to utilize your knowledge in a very constructive way. And in that sense, we can see the through lines between Hanna and Rifat, in the sense that they are basically the children of their own environment. They do not change themselves. They do not mold themselves to fit a certain narrative. They do not do not have the PR sort of tone in the voice, the sort of weird tone that people, when they get into positions of power, have. Um, it is absolutely robotic. I hate it on a personal level. They do not have that, and they are very serious about their work. Both Rifat and Hanna. So when Hanna used to meet with people from Fateh with meetings, he always stressed secrecy. He always stressed, like, if I'm meeting you at a table in a certain cafeteria or a restaurant, um, do not go straight at me. Like, pretend you're doing something, you're buying something, and oops, I bump into you and stuff like that. Like, do not make it obvious that we're in contact. And he always used pseudonyms. Um, and one of to harp on to that secrecy thing point, Hassan Kanafani always stressed in his criticism of the Palestinian resistance. So there was a lot of criticism of the Palestinian resistance, I believe, after Black September. So he criticized the Palestinian resistance, saying, Fatah has pseudonyms, but everybody knows the real names of the people. Like, what's the use of having a pseudonym if you know the real name of the person? And you just call him by the pseudonym, but you know his real name. So Hanna Mikhail, as opposed to a lot of people in Fatah, um, actually kept the pseudonym, and nobody knew who he was. Um, they knew he was Abu Umar, but that's about it. Who Abu Umar is, what's his real name, nobody knows. Um, and with Rifat, he also took it seriously, because he worked within his field, and he compiled the sort of work of his students into one singular book, Gaza Writes Back. And he always stressed that we need to elevate Gazan voices. We need to make Gazans heard. So both in their own respective fields, they were very much very serious. They did not take things lightly. They did not surrender to the dominant narrative. So he could have been like any other member of Fatah. He has a pseudonym and he has his real name, and both people say them at the same time. But he stressed secrecy within organizational work. And that's what made him very much different from other people in Fatah. That's very much the difference between them. And yeah, sorry for the long-winded response.
We love a long-winded response, so no need to apologize. I I I was laughing when you were saying the thing about you know, all the Zionists can sort of do in a debate is throw a tantrum, because we're seeing that all over the country right now. Actually, probably everywhere there's a student encampment in the United States, there's a collection of Zionists throwing a tantrum. So we see this. Louis, good to see you. This
Hello,
conversation
Louis.
wouldn't be happening without you, so shout out to you as well. And yeah, just to underscore this point, so someone asked kind of what the FLN is. It's a National Liberation Front in Algeria. So the point was just saying you need a unified kind of national liberation front in Palestine, rather than groups of factions with differences and different, I mean, I don't know if you want to say more to that, but that the way I understand the point you're making is that he was arguing for a
Yeah,
unified national liberation front.
yeah, exactly. And to sort of contextualize Algeria in its own sort of idiosyncrasies, The FLN formed and it absorbed many sort of Algerians from different walks of life. So the FLN wasn't a singular sort of ideological sort of movement. It had many people within it, and you could say that's good, you could say that's bad. That's up for debate. And people, there's a certain faction relating to a guy, a political leader called Misal al-Hajj, and they're called the Misalis because of their allegiance to him. He stressed the sort of Knesset politics, the sort of PA politics, that we need to integrate ourselves within the system. We need to win civil rights. We need to win political rights by appealing to the colonizer. And there were a lot of clashes between the FLN and the Misalis. They were very much bloody. But that's very much the, I guess, the bill that it's going to cause an national liberation war. A lot of people are going to get killed. That's the reality of it. A lot of people on the wrong side of history, definitely. So just throwing that out there.
Appreciate that. And also, as M says, it's a good example of how to end settler colonialism. For folks who don't know too much about Algerian history, there were a lot of French settlers in Algeria. And so it is a case that other resistance movements to colonialism, but specifically settler colonialism, often draw inspiration from. So the next figure that you bring in, and you've already talked about him a little bit or mentioned him a couple times, is Fatih al-Shakaki, who in 1992 was the Secretary General of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. So just say a little bit about him and what you thought was important about his legacy that you kind of wanted to weave into this discussion here.
Yes. So Fatih al-Shakaki was born in 1951 in the Gaza Strip, just after the Nakba. He was born to a very poor family. He lived most of his life in basically destitution and poverty, but he very much excelled at school. And at an early sort of stage of his life, he was a Nasserist. He believed in the Pan-Arab dream. And he fought very much ardently for it until 1967 happened. 1967 represented a very much a devastating ideological blow for Fatih al-Shakaki. And afterwards, he began to sort of unravel the Nasserist project. And I'm not saying this as my own opinion. I have my own opinion of the Nasserist project, and it's basically al-Qadri's opinion. So if you don't know al-Qadri, he made the unmaking of Arab nationalism. I think he tackles it very much amazingly. And there's also a Marxist called Anwar Abdel Malik. He also tackled the Nasserist period, Egypt's military regime, I think, or military society. It's very much a prescient book about Egypt, and it still holds true today. So the analysis made, they were made before 1967, but they are still present today with regards to Egypt and its class dynamics. So to be on the point, he became sort of disillusioned with the Nasserist project. He said that there's something wrong with it. There's definitely something wrong to be dealt this devastating blow after so many victories. For the Nasserist project to end like that, there has to be some sort of innate flaw in it. And he went to the conclusion that secular regimes like Nasser's are not capable of leading a liberation struggle because they don't mobilize the masses with the il-wa'i, which is basically consciousness. So consciousness comes from mobilization via religion, via the effective use of religion for mobilization purposes and for also personal development purposes. And he started sort of study groups, close-knit study groups in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. So he went to study in Birzeit University, and he studied medicine and physics, if I'm not mistaken. So he started study groups there. He started reading Hassan al-Banna, Sayyid Qutb, lots of Muslim Brotherhood figures. He started reading basic Islamic history, stuff like that, to better understand the situation we're in. So he looked at the past in order to understand the present. And he also studied in Egypt, and there he started fully to be engaged with political work and study groups. And most of the students, and this is a common misconception about Islamists, and that they are uncultured and they don't know Lenin, they don't know Marx. If you look at Fath al-Shiqaqi's sort of analysis of the state, so a lot of people say the Islamic Jihad wants an Islamic state in Palestine. Same thing also about Hamas, when they say it. But when you look at the writings of Fath al-Shiqaqi, he says, we don't actually want an Islamic state. We want a civil society that decides what it wants from the state, and we want the states oppressive. And he said it very much in line with Lenin's. And he said, to quote from Lenin, the oppressive sort of state apparatus to diminish under the civil society. And he went to the example of how Islamic scholars, sort of yielded great influence in Islamic history over the state. And they could mobilize entire armies if they wanted to, through a simple fatwa or a simple thing like that. And he stated that this is what we need: a strong civil society, a state that is subservient to the civil society, and a civil society that is basically represents the interests of the masses. So this is a common misconception about the Islamic Jihad. For Hamas, for Hamas, basically, they asked Ahmed Yassin in an interview, if communists won in Palestine, would you give up power? And he said, yes, I will give up power. That's okay. I don't care. So the whole line of thinking of an Islamic oppressive state that imposes Sharia, and oh my God, they're gonna be like XYZ racist example. It's a bit tone deaf, and you have to read the literature, and you have to engage with the founders of the movement to understand their point of view. You can't go off of basic stereotypes of Islamists. Otherwise, you're no better. And I see this from fellow Palestinians too. You're no better than anyone vilifying the resistance. Like, this is very much vilifying the resistance, that they're dogmatic, that they're stuck in one ideological model, when in fact they're not. So to go back to Fath al-Shiqaqi, so he formed study groups in Egypt. They started to read all types of stuff. They started to engage with sort of Islam and Muslim Brotherhoods in action regarding Palestine. So there was a lot of debate regarding the Muslim Brotherhood and its inaction towards Palestine. And Fath al-Shiqaqi even had a debate with Ahmed Yassin, the founder of Hamas, about this in 1968. He met him and they talked about it. And Ahmed Yassin told him, the time is not ready. And Fath al-Shiqaqi said, why do you need to wait? The opportunity is right there. And he always went after the Muslim Brotherhood for the time has not come. It's always the time has not come. And afterwards, Ahmed Yassin realized the same thing as Fath al-Shiqaqi, that you have to break away from the rigidness of the Muslim Brotherhood and form your own organization. And they did that. And that's how Hamas was born. So they discussed all of these things. They discussed also like really classic stuff like Shakespeare and Oedipus and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and stuff like that. They had very much philosophical discussions surrounding everything under the sun. And I think Fath al-Shiqaqi even wrote an article about sort of on Lenin's death at a certain year. I forgot the year, but he wrote an article sort of praising him. So this is who Fath al-Shiqaqi is. He is very much not the stereotypical view of Islamists that are dogmatic and stuff like that. And eventually he formed the Islamic Jihad, and it was inspired, of course, by the Iranian Revolution. So he wrote about the Iranian Revolution, what action does when mobilized with religion, and how that can create an entire revolution and flip a society upside down for the better, um, to free itself from imperialism. And this is sort of this was sort of the catalyst for him, that we can do this. If Iran does it, we can also do it. And he started developing the study groups. He started sort of engaging with different Islamist groups, Islamic groups in Egypt. He engaged with the Muslim Brotherhood. He tried sort of rallying them to his cause, but he failed because they're the Muslim Brotherhood. That's it. uh, and eventually he got imprisoned for his book in Egypt, and he got imprisoned for a short while. Then he got free, and then he got imprisoned for a second time for like 4 months. And through this, he saw himself as a quote unquote Islamist, how other factions in Egypt, so the Muslim Brotherhood specifically, abandoned him. He was abandoned in prison. Nobody had his back. No organization in Egypt had his back. And this was the pivotal moment for him, that we need to do something. We need to break out of this stalemate. Coupled with the PLO, coupled with the sort of discussions surrounding the PLO's 10-point program, whereby sort of it paved the way for sort of normalization with Israel based on sort of the two-state solution. So it started in 1974. And through that, he became slowly disillusioned with the PLO also. And in 1981, the Islamic Jihad was born, and they started launching operations within the heartlands of Palestine, armed attacks. The very first, well, not the very first, but one of the most prominent sort of prison escapes in Palestinian history was made by also Islamic Jihad people. People affiliated with them, their fighters, their people, in 1986. And in the literature of the Islamic Jihad, they consider that the catalyst to the first Intifada, that this was the catalyst for the first Intifada. And eventually, after the attacks happened, the Mossad, of course, had its eye on him, and he was assassinated in Malta. And through this, he always emphasized that we need to take decisive action. And this was his break with the Muslim Brotherhood, that it was not decisive enough, that it had an unproductive language, that it favored passivity to revolution. For him, this is why I quoted him saying, basically, the excessive consumption of words has led us to accumulated futility and a break in one's soul. And we see this, we sense it in the fact that we waste our energy on a lot of unproductive languages, unproductive conversations. Some of us are even too afraid to start conversations because of fear that we might get arrested or something. So this language of inaction must be sort of basically eradicated, because it's not helping the cause, it's not doing anything, it's actually draining us. And we must sort of refocus our energy on something that actually matters, which is engaging with people that are actually interested in learning about the cause, doing work on the ground for the cause, and just never letting up, just never letting up, never ceasing. Because the moment we seize ground, moment we seize ground, we seize our entire movement, we seize our entire sort of existence. Every compromise, historically in the Palestinian case, has led to further compromise. There's no real politicking about it. Um, we can see it via Oslo. We can see it via earlier examples like the village leagues, which was a precursor to Oslo. It was sort of scattered leaderships around the West Bank trying to replace the PLO. Nobody accepted them. They eventually some of them got assassinated, some of them got rocks thrown at them, some of them got arrested by the very people who employed them, aka the Israelis. And some of them got affiliated directly with the Israeli intelligence, so they were directly spies. Um, so in that sense, this is what Fath al-Shiqaqi represents. And when we look at Refaat, he very much represents sort of everything that Fathi also represents. That he when he tweets something, for example, some stupid Zionist says something, he literally says F you or something, and that's it. He doesn't engage. He doesn't he doesn't sort of put the energy to it. He always engages with good faith people. He doesn't engage with really bad faith people. And if he did, he would be wasting his energy. That's for sure. And he always works for his students. He always sort of does something productive. He never sort of he's not like very much other professors who pontificate to their students, who sort of put useless conversations on the table. I'm a university student. I know how professors act. Like to be able to sort of create an entire event called "What You Don't Know About Malcolm X," it's amazing. Because no professor does that. Like really, no professor does that. They're creating an entire event from scratch by yourself. It highlights a certain will. It highlights a certain language that he wants to convey to the world and to his students especially. And through his collection of writings, I have to stress that he collected the writings of his students. That's also, for a student, a massive boost in their own confidence, in their own sort of abilities, that I am capable of sort of being heard. And that dispossessed the quote unquote subaltern. I have an issue with the label subaltern because it implies continuity, that we're always subaltern. But the dispossessed, it when faced with something that actually empowers them, they create actually amazing things, and it snowballs into sort of other endeavors more radical than one another. So Refaat was directly supporting resistance in Gaza through motivating his students, through being a good role model, through being a social leader, through stuff like that really built a front, just like how Fath al-Shiqaqi built an intellectual front against the Muslim Brotherhood. He built a front against the elitism of his of academia. This is what Refaat did. If we make the comparison between the Muslim Brotherhood and sort of the academia, it's very much the same. Their inaction, their inability to tackle Palestine. Like the Muslim Brotherhood cannot tackle Palestine, couldn't tackle Palestine until Hamas formed. So this was the sort of through lines of which I thought how he could be related to Fath al-Shiqaqi.
Appreciate that. And I just wanted to share for a second from your piece. Let's see. So this here is the quote that you were talking about. He stated that in large part due to the excessive consumption of words, we need to find a new productive language, a language that creates action and revolution, a language that is coalesced with blood and sweat. We need to take a serious step in the right direction, and I assert that this step necessitates the liberation of the will from what it has succumbed to, from the accumulated inaction and futility, as well as the poisonous culture that breaks one's soul under the pretext of political realism. So, yeah, just wanted to read that. I really appreciated that quote Yeah.
Yeah, and when you compare the quote to something Rifat writes, it's basically a carbon copy of what Rifat might write. So there is a sense of uh, both of them being intellectual and social leaders, because to build a revolutionary movement you have to be a social leader first, and he organized study groups, he rallied for certain causes when he was in the Gaza Strip, he met with political leaders in the Gaza Strip and discussed with them when he was a little kid, and that's unprecedented, because um, to be a little kid and have that much political knowledge for Fatah Shiqaqi, it's amazing. um, and in that sense, both of them, their assassination is an attempt to break Gaza's social fabric, to break its own fight. And this is how we should view genocide. It's not. It is mass killings, of course, but it's also an attempt at fracturing social cohesion. And this is what I write in the introduction of my article, that there's a certain social cohesion in Gaza that allows armed action to form, armed action to fight. Armed action is not from some unknown place in the universe. It's from the people of Gaza themselves. They're the sons of Gaza. And through this, the resistance can continue on. And this is why we see, for example, in Gaza, um, attacks, for example, airstrikes against anyone sort of trying to deliver aid. Anyone. They want to break the social cohesion. They want to break the sumud, which is the resilience of people, their ability to withstand uh, bombardments, an extreme siege, medieval siege, to be precise. Um, and the assassination of Rifat and Fatih Shiqaqi should be viewed in this light. That they built something. They had to be assassinated they had to be important, have to have built something for them to be assassinated like that. For an intelligence officer to contact Rifat and tell him, you are going to die. Plain and simple. Like whatever you had, you're gonna die. It's You have to be a social leader. You have to have made an impact. You have to have made a dent somewhere in Israel's mind to be assassinated. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. They have to recognize you as a threat. Thank you to the folks who have, contributed. Appreciated. Um, so someone also asked, and before we moved on, I wanted to ask you if you had any recommendations for Palestinian Islamic Jihad reading. I know that often it is very difficult to find reading on these groups
Mhm.
in English, uh, that's not through a language of kind of counterterrorism, right? Which is what a lot of the stuff that we have. Yeah.
Um, so I've read bits and pieces of it. I haven't read it fully. But there's a good book, relatively good book. It's not the sort of Washington think tank lexicon. It's called the Palestinian Jihad Faith Awareness in the Middle East or something like that. It's by Eric Scar, who is I think Scandinavian, but I don't know from which country. So he analyzes the sort of ideological underpinnings of the Islamic Jihad, of sort of Fath Shiqaqi specifically. And another reading I would recommend for the Islamic Jihad, if you speak Arabic, of course, is رحلة الدم الذي هزم السيف, which is the journey of the blood that defeated the sword. And it talks about, it's basically a complete collection of everything Fatih Shiqaqi wrote. And it gives you a really deep and honestly emotional, like when you look at his speeches, he's very much, it inspires a certain emotion in you, that it's not purely for mobilization, but it's not purely also um, sort of very much, I guess, technocratic. So he merges the technocratic with the mobilization. It's very interesting how he goes about things, I guess. And I can drop the name of the book in the chat for everyone. But yeah, those are the two readings I would recommend. Um, and Generally, there's a gap. There's very much an epistemological gap, um, especially in English, between what we hear about the Islamic Jihad, about Hamas, and what's actually right about it. And this is sort of the crux of the issue, and this is why I talked about Fatih Shaqaqi, that there is a gap, and I have a duty as a Palestinian. I know Arabic, I know how to translate stuff, I'm good with English. I have a duty to sort of make clear that a lot of the stuff you hear about them probably isn't true, or is out of context, or is antiquated. So yeah, this is a personal duty of mine, definitely.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much. I think it's been helpful throughout the last 7 months, and I wish we had done more of it prior to that to engage with Palestinians on these kinds of questions, because there is so much yeah, intentional, of course, propaganda that's created, that is designed to these groups and to, you know, which is it's very much a part of, U.S. imperialism and
Mhm.
Western imperialism. So yeah. Um, all right, so let's keep it going. So moving on. Um, So at this point in the article, you kind of pivot towards some criticism, some critique of the Western Academy and the inability of it institutionally, as well as, of course, individuals, particularly professors and academics, their inability to engage in productive language around Palestinian resistance since October 7th, which you cite many examples, and some of which we've been talking about on the show over the past 7 months. Abdul Jawad Omar, of course, has responded to some of these folks, whether it's Judith Butler or Adam Schatz. Um, so, do you want to take some time and run through some of the criticisms there, and some of the points that you wanted to make with that section of the piece?
Mhm. So, when you sort of read the piece at first, you see me sort of trying to debunk, quote unquote, try to debunk what they're saying, and then saying we shouldn't put energy into sort of debating them. And this may seem hypocritical, but the point of trying to, quote unquote, debunk them, um, it's to highlight how utterly useless and honestly bad faith um, they are as scholars. Um, that the point that I'm trying to make is that they argue in bad faith, and this is how they argue in bad faith. It's not made specifically to sort of debunk what they're saying, but to analyze how arguments are made in bad faith, in that sense, if that makes sense. So I focus on Adam Schatz and Gilbert Ashkar, I think. Um, those are the sort of main people I focus about. So for me, for Adam, when I read Adam Schatz's piece, and this may be a me thing. It's not me. It may not be everyone's thing, but there's a sense of ego in the words he uses, in the tone of his own writing. It's very much smug. It's very much. It's very much sort of when he says that there's a primordial tendency with associated with the resistance. He's very much saying, he's very much dehumanizing the resistance. He's putting it on par with um, basically Neanderthals, that they engage in fighting because of emotions, because they're emotionally charged, because they're filled with all these Oriental ideas about revenge, and this is far from the truth. When you engage in an operation as large as the October 7th, it is a calculated political decision made by years of political statements. Um, Hamas has tried protesting. Um, Hundreds got kneecapped. It has tried every method under the sun to end the siege on Gaza specifically and to protect Jerusalem and the West Bank. And all of them except military means have failed. So when you're faced with annihilation or fighting, you would fight. That's the reality of it. And this is how October 7th should be read. It's the fact that it's from the accumulation of the last 16 years on Gaza and the last 15 years on the West Bank and Jerusalem. And we shouldn't isolate the three geographies because in this specifically, they're very much connected. And when he talks about the tribal left, and it's always some umbrella term, I have no idea what it means. What the hell is the tribal left? What is
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly? Like these are very much vague wordings that are meant to sound fancy, but they do not mean anything in reality. What is the tribal left? Is the tribal left people who support the Palestinian resistance, or is it the tribal left who don't support it because it's not leftist enough for them? This could be the tribal left also. Like I could make the same argument, and it's clear where the ideological conceptions of Adam Schatz come from. The fact that he imbues resistance, and Fanon specifically, he imbues Fanon with a historical background, that Fanon is simply diagnosing the colonized. It's simply a description of the colonized. It's not meant to celebrate what the colonized does, except the whole premise of the Ritual of the Earth is celebrating what the colonized did in response to the colonizer. And he states multiple times that fighting a national liberation war cures the many illnesses of the colonized. So he's clearly making that argument. How could you decontextualize him this much and boil him down to a simple psychologist? I have no idea. And he's certainly not stupid, that's for sure. It's very much a premeditated decision to sort of do that. And in that sense, this is my criticism of Schatz and how he's arguing in bad faith. For Gerbet Ashkar, it's very much simple. It's the fact that he says the architects of October 7th must not have known the repercussions of their actions because they were mistaken and they thought everybody would join in, every Arab and Muslim would join in, or because they are just emotionally charged and they just wanted to start a war for no reason because they are a religious fundamentalist movement. They're Islamists. Of course they would do that because they believe in jihad, the big scary word of jihad. And what he says undermines everything I have made in my first article, that when you're faced with such odds about October 7th, when you're faced with such odds, it's a duty to fight. It's not even an option. It's a necessity. October 7th should have happened sooner. That's the reality of it. It should have very much happened sooner. If there's any criticism to be made about October 7th, it should have happened sooner. When you're politically deadlocked, when you're sieged for 16, 17 years, there's no sign of stopping. When you are carpet bombed every 2 to 3 years, and that's if Israel's being generous with you and it's giving you leeway. When settlements expand in the West Bank at an alarming rate, Jerusalem also, you call yourself a national liberation movement like Hamas calls itself, you're supposed to fight. That's it. And just like any sort of action, you cannot sort of critique it in the moment because you do not know what the future will hold. So to say the architects of October 7th are mistaken 2 months after October 7th, and it's tone deaf to say the least. It's screaming out loud that you have no regard for sort of the long-term effects of this thing. Like you just consider the short term. short-term Gaza is isolated. Oh God, Gaza is isolated. Even though Lebanon is fighting, Yemen is fighting, and they have been waging wars, entire wars. So and Iraq also. So this notion of isolating the resistance from its many fronts um, is prevalent throughout Gilbert Ashkar's article, which I can link, but it's not worth the read, to be honestly blunt. But this is the main crux of the arguments that he makes, and this is why I sort of tried to refute them and sort of said what I said. It's because not because I want a response from them, or not because I want to prove them wrong. That's not the point. The point here is to highlight to the readers that they are pretty much making very much bad faith arguments. They're disregarding the minutia of everything. They are disregarding history, the conditions that led to October 7th, and they're disregarding the multiple fronts waged for Gaza. Um, and yeah.
Appreciate that, for sure. So let's bring this back to Refaat. So you highlight the importance of stories for Refaat.
Mhm.
You also talk about the importance, which you mentioned, I think, a little bit earlier, but I think it's good to return to the importance of him staying in Gaza. He could have obviously, as you mentioned in the piece, chosen a career somewhere in the West. And refusing to get tied down and to work within the kind of unproductive language that you're just gave some examples of within the Western Academy. So, do you want to say a little bit more about these things?
Definitely. I think what Rifat proves is orthodox economics don't work. Like I'm saying it as a student of economics, that humans tend to sort of want to maximize their profit utility. That's a lie. That's a blatant lie. If that was the case, many Palestinians would have fled. Many Palestinians would have went outside. Um, may have been discriminated against, but they would have had a better living than living in Palestine. But they didn't. And it's not because they are earning better. Like Rifat could have earned better outside. But he deliberately chose to stay with his people, to build something with his people, um, because he saw the siege as an attempt to break the social fabric, as an attempt to let people out, as an attempt to, and as Netanyahu says, thin out Gaza. And this is something he didn't accept. And it can be sort of interpreted this way through his actions, that he always strived to better the students, to be an inspiration for them, and to sort of make them feel represented and heard, that they have a voice. Um, and this may be tied, and maybe vaguely tied, to sort of the fact that Rifat's brother in 2014 got martyred, and I don't think that's a very much a well-known fact about Rifat. So I think that sort of hurt from his brother getting martyred in Shaja'iyya in Gaza has left um, him with extreme hurt, of course, but also again a love for Gaza, that um, there are many people like me, and I need to support them. I need to be a central figure for them. And in that sense, he, just like Hassan Kanafani, just like Fatih Shiqaqi, just like Lenin, of course, Lenin, they could have lived comfy lives. They could have been working a 9 to 5. They could have done that, but they didn't. Not because they have a secret agenda or sponsored by someone, or whatever people say about anyone with the resistance, that, oh, Hamas is paying them, they're on Hamas's payroll. This is not the reality. Some people do things for free. I know that Zionists don't believe that because they're paid to go on protests. So I know where they're coming from. They're projecting, but some people aren't like them. So in that sense, this is how I sort of try to make the point of Rifat, that he debunks every orthodox economics concept under the earth. He's the living antithesis of Homo economicus. Homo economicus doesn't exist. He, Rifat, Ghassan, Fathi Shiqaqi, Lenin, everyone I mentioned in my article are living antithesis of that. And they live because of their actions and the fact that we're speaking about them right now.
Right on. Do you want to say a little bit connecting, because you do talk, we haven't talked a lot about Cabral in this discussion, but you do talk about Cabral and the theory of class suicide here, which relates to kind of what you're talking about right now. So I don't know if you want to draw that together a little bit for folks too.
Yeah, so for people who don't know Cabral, he led the Guinea-Bissau sort of independence movement. He wrote a lot about sort of how to liberate oneself from colonialism, and his book on that subject is very much phenomenal. So it's a very much recommended reading. And he talked about sort of class suicide, that we have we hate the bourgeoisie. Okay, that's right. And they have inherent interest with capital. Capital has inherent interest with imperialism. That's right. But there is a subsection, the petit bourgeoisie, that are not completely bourgeois, that they come from lower class backgrounds. They have elevated themselves in the social ladder, and they become petit bourgeois. They're teachers. They are people who just middle class people that have a certain social prestige. So he said of them that if they want to have a purpose and they want to not be estranged from the people, they must metaphorically kill themselves, negate all of their class positions, negate their own sort of dreams of rising through the social ladder to become bourgeois. And they must fight with the masses. They must fight with the peasants, the proletariat, and form a united front with them. In that sense, Rifat is very much an example of that. He could have went to England. He could have went to the United States. He could have just left, like a lot of people leave their countries, but he didn't, and he chose to live under siege and under occupation for the sole reason of being one with the masses. Just like Fathi Shiqaqi, despite not being able to enter Palestine after being arrested in Egypt, he still fought on. He formed a revolutionary organization, just like Hassan Kanafani. There's a reason he got assassinated. There's a reason why we're still talking about him. We're still translating his work today. There's a reason why he was a PFLP member, and he engaged heavily with the PFLP. And he wrote a lot of their organizational materials, just like Hanna Mical. So when we talk about them, we must also put it in this theoretical framework. And it's tied to the guerrilla intellectual. And there's a common thread here that Hanna Mical, Ghassan Kanafani, Fathi Shiqaqi, and Cabral, and Walter Rodney all have very much the same idea, just under different names. And lots of them maybe do not conform to each other ideologically, but there's a certain line where they cross, which is at national liberation, that we see the very same ideas form and coalesce, that inaction is bad. Lots of people need to sacrifice their positions, and we must be not to bureaucratize our revolution, not to be elitists. We must be one with the masses, and all of them explicitly stated that.
For sure. So I'm gonna read another little quote here, and then we can kind of wrap up with my questions. If people have more questions in the audience, feel free to drop them in, and we'll get to a few. So hang on one second. All right. So the section I'm going to read starts. We cannot mourn Refaat without ridding ourselves of the old language of rational compromises, realpolitik, and other buzzwords that aim to strip us of our collective agency for an amorphous solution to our plights, a solution imposed from the halls of the White House and intellectual conversations in the imperial core. Any solution to our plight should stem from the alleys of the refugee camps and the fields of the villages, from the very people who are suffering under the yoke of U.S. imperialism and Israeli settler colonialism. Unequivocal support for the Palestinian resistance should be non negotiable in the face of a world assault on its material existence. And such support should be the backbone of the new language that we can finally mourn Rifat in. Beautifully written.
Thank you.
So my question was, you kind of close this piece um, thinking not just about mourning Rifat, but how we honor him.
Mhm.
So maybe you could close with some reflections on that. And then if, like I said, if other folks in the audience have questions, please feel free to join into the conversation.
Yeah, and it's tied to what I said before. So that one state solution, two state solution. We should do X, Y, Z. We should shake hands and do X, Y, Z. Every solution that's been talked about Palestine is something imposed upon Palestine. So you don't take Palestine as the central point. You take the White House, what think tanks say, what X figure says, what Y figure says, but you never take Palestinians for what they say. And any solution really to what we're undergoing should stem from the people who are constantly being attacked by settlers, constantly being harassed, constantly being bombed, constantly enduring incursions by the Israeli military. It should stem from the Palestinian people, and not the Palestinian people as a whole. Even like some of the Palestinian people, and not to engage in identity politics. Not every Palestinian also is necessarily victimized. Some Palestinians are very much in favor of the status quo, and they must be disregarded in this case. They would love for the status quo to continue. And they curse October 7th because it disrupted the status quo, it disrupted the little bubble I live in. And in that sense, when we rid ourselves of that language and we actually listen to the people, this is how we honor the fact. And there's a difference between honoring and mourning. If we want to fully mourn the fact, we really need to work on it. It's not an easy task. Mourning is not putting a picture of him. It's not putting him as a profile picture. It's not even writing about him. It's not anything but working to striving to work to be him, like absolutely striving, and to achieve what Rifat has achieved, in ridding himself of the conventional language of inaction and to actually do something productive and recognized on a wide scale throughout Gaza. It takes a lot of work, and if we want to mourn Rifat, we must become Rifat. That's how I view it. Just like if we want to mourn Fath al-Shiqaqi, we must be like Fath al-Shiqaqi. And every other figure I mentioned. Lenin, Capral, everyone. Had al-Alawi, Hanna Mikhail, everyone.
Ameed, really appreciate again the piece. It is beautifully written,
Thank you.
and I'm sure our audience will enjoy reading it through for themselves if they haven't already. I'm sure many of them have as well. Um, and thank you so much for this conversation. As I said,
Thank you
if
for having me.
people, yeah, no, it's been an honor and a pleasure. I'm sure that we will do it again. I brought this up for two reasons. One, it connects to a lot of what you were talking about in terms of 90% of the faculty here in Turtle Island. For folks who don't know, that's what we call the North America. Can't even say Palestine and have been instead promoting free speech. And I think even among that, Laura Brarian, like there's probably, you know, 9.9 more percent who can say Palestine, but certainly uh, would still condemn, October 7th, or, don't uphold the value and the right of Palestinian resistance. Um, and so, that's an even small, and most of the people who do are the ones who are losing their jobs right now and everything else. So, appreciate to those people. I shout out to, um,
Bikram
is
Gill.
it Bikram Gill, Muhammad Abdu. There's also I'm forgetting someone I wanted. Oh, Mamadou Tal, who's a grad student at Cornell who was suspended, and many others. Friend of a recent guest on the podcast, Bryce Green, was suspended and banned from campus for 5 years this weekend. So there is a lot of repression, but salute to all of the people who are standing up, and people find petitions and things like that, of course, to support them as well. um so anyways, I just wanted to take a moment to that, and also to just say also thank you, Laura Berry. I know that you've given a couple of contributions in our last couple of live streams, and I have not had time to thank you for that, so I appreciate that as well. um all right, is there anything else that you wanted to say in closing? It doesn't look like the audience has more questions. I guess we went through it pretty thoroughly.
Mhm. Yeah, I just wanted to say about Palestine. Just talking about Palestine in the West and even in Palestine itself, it costs. It definitely costs. It costs you in Palestine. It costs you in the West. Um, if you are a distinguished professor, you might lose your status. You might get defamed, like Joseph Massad, in front of the entire U.S. public. What has been said about him has been a disgrace. Um, if there is any semblance of democracy to this fascist system, it absolutely imploded on the day that he was denounced in Congress. Um, and what has occurred since with the encampments, with the movement, the student movement, only shows how this system and cannot sustain itself by regular counterinsurgency. They talk about student agency. They talk about we hear you. They talk about very much contained and very much canned student activities, whether it's political or quote unquote civic engagement things, volunteering things. It's all counterinsurgency to stifle radical politics, to stifle Palestine, to stifle any sort of thinking that goes, well, why are we paying tax dollars to a war machine that is committing a genocide? Why are we still silent about that? Why are our campuses in affiliation with Israeli businesses, with businesses that fund the Israeli military, with Israeli universities? Um, and the system cannot comprehend that. It cannot comprehend these questions, cannot have answers for them except the baton and the tear gas and the pepper spray. And if push comes to shove, it will be the bullet, unfortunately, because this is how the system works.
Appreciate that. Just finally, I'll just say, all power to the resistance, and shout out to all of the students, that are raising hell on college campuses right now around the country and around the world, who are taking risks, and um, you know don't take that lightly in terms of the potential sacrifices and sacrifices that students and other people in are making, and obviously, as you said, it does cost, right? And but that it is a I think we should uphold it as our duty to do what we can, and yeah, to strive to be like Rafat, right? So
Mm.
yeah. All right, thank you so much, Ameed. This has been
Thank
a
you
real
for having
pleasure.
me. It's been a great honor, honestly, and I love this discussion. I love it.
I love it too. All right, I'll talk to you soon. All right, bye bye,
Bye
everybody.
bye.